Here are the top stories for today, August 25, 2020. President Duterte assures that every peso spent on the government's COVID-19 response will be accounted for. The president says he will not give even an inch of Philippine territory to other countries. The DOH assures that safeguards on prospective COVID-19 vaccines are in place even without Phase 4 trials. And the Pony Boys of Baguio City's Wright Park turn to horse compost making to make a livelihood amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Good day, I'm William Theo. Welcome to the PNA Newsroom. President Rodrigo Roa Duterte addressed the country this morning, tackling the issues that beset our country. Duterte opened his speech with the assurance that the fund being disbursed for COVID-19 response will be well accounted for.
Gusto kong ipaalam sa lahat that as upon my oath of office, huwag kayong mag-alala. Lahat ng pera dyan na gastos dito sa away ng COVID ay ma-account. I will hold myself responsible for this sole and solemn duty of answering for and in behalf of the Executive Department of all the funds that were spent in the fight against COVID. Huwag kayong mag-alala kasi yung may kulang o nagkulang, kukunin natin balik sa kanila o hindi. I assure you, I will be the one to endorse the case to the prosecuting office. Ako ang magpirma mismo. If we have through with the investigation, allow the Secretary of Justice to complete his investigation and his signature on the endorsement will be accompanied by my signature, and that will ensure na ang mga pera makita ninyo paano ginastos. I am asking the National Task Force on COVID-19 to properly report on how all the funds were spent and their intended purpose.
President Duterte said he wants cabinet officials to disclose their agency's spending through its pandemic response either every 15 days or monthly. Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque earlier said the president already asked government agencies to submit their respective expense report to his office.
Itong sa cabinet, another publication sa disbursement nila, kung ilan ang ginastos nila ngayong buwan na ito. O gusto mo every 15 days para mas maganda. Ilagay nila magkano ang ginastos and for what. At the end of the month maybe or after buwanan, mas maganda. Makita na nila kung yung pinuntahan ng pera, pumunta ba talaga at nagastos. Ipapublish yung so they must prepare well in advance because I would require them to publish in the newspaper, sa 3 newspaper of general circulation. Mamili na kayo kung anong newspaper gusto ninyo. Ipapublish ko ito ang mga bibilihin. At pagkatapos, ipapublish ko pagkatapos sa notice, sino yung bidders.
President Duterte vows to run after PhilHealth officials involved in corruption. He says he will hold them accountable in the remainder of his term.
Yung PhilHealth ang dapat imbestigahan, ang dapat i-prosecute lahat at dapat ikulong. Kung yan na lang ang trabaho ko sa maiwan ko sa 2 taon, yan na rin ang gagawin ko. One of the things that, few things that I can do in the remaining 2 years of my term, ubusin ko ito yung panahon ko to work on the cases for people who are involved in the PhilHealth.
President Duterte earlier ordered the creation of a task force to probe the allegations of corruption and other anomalies in PhilHealth. The panel, led by the Department of Justice, is authorized to look into PhilHealth's finances, lifestyle checks on officials and employees, and recommend preventive suspension on involved government officials. Justice Secretary Menardo Guevarra said the investigation will center on the alleged fraudulent activities in PhilHealth Information Technology System, legal sector, and interim reimbursement mechanism. He said they will also implement lifestyle checks on certain officials and recommend structural reforms in PhilHealth. The task force has 30 days from its information to submit to Malacanang its findings and recommendations.
So far, in the fact-finding and investigation reports that we have received so far, including those from the Senate and the House of Representatives, it seems that the legal sector is a very ripe source of irregularities.
The Bureau of Customs, or BOC, is gaining grounds against corruption. Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez cited the big help of an IT system that Customs Commissioner Reynaldo Jagger Guerrero is using. Dominguez is calling for a digitalization of the national government subsidy programs to avoid corruption in distributing it to qualified beneficiaries.
We wish to inform the President and my colleagues in the Cabinet on the latest update on the Small Business Wage Subsidy Program and the factors that have made this program largely efficient and effective. Based on the factors and the adoption of the following principles for future subsidy programs. Number one, we think all subsidy programs in the future should be digitized. Ito po, mahirap po gumawa ng kalokohan dito kung by computer. Talagang walang cash na hinahandle. Nobody can keep the cash.
Wala ng transaksyon na may tao-tao. Puro makina na lang at diretso na sa... Ang pinaka-importante dito is yung paghulog sa bangko ng gobyerno, diretso ito sa empleyado. There is no intermediary and there is no intervention of any kind, lalo na tao, diretso sa inyo. Now, ang sabi ni Sani, kung may pagkakamali man, sa inyo na yan sa data or data, if you want to pronounce it that way.
DOLE Secretary Silvestre Bello III says the government has allotted another 5 billion pesos for OFW's repatriation expenses. He also gives an update on their cash aid programs for workers affected by the pandemic.
The Department of Labor and Employment implemented 3 major programs, Mr. President, for workers in the formal and informal sectors, and especially the OFWs who have been badly affected by COVID-19. For these programs, Mr. President, we had a total funding of 12,400,000,000 sourced from the DOLE 2020 regular budget, 4.8 billion, Bayanihan 2.5 billion, and the recently released repatriation funds of 5 billion, Mr. President. Nagpapasalamat po yung mga OFW, Mr. President, because we did not really ask for this fund, but we were all surprised when you gave us 5 billion for repatriation expenses.
President Duterte took offense on the criticism of Vice President Leni Robredo as she noted the lack of confidence in the government's leadership in handling its COVID-19 response efforts. Robredo urged the government to come up with a comprehensive, quick, and clear plan to address the pandemic. Duterte said Robredo's criticism is adding fuel to the fire and that destroying the government is not the solution to the present crisis.
Ito naman kay Leni that in her ending statement said that kung hindi ko daw gawain ng gobyerno, gagawin ng tao. Well, sa panahon itong pandemic, medyo desperado ang mga tao. Tapos nagdagan ninyo ng mga ganon na wala naman kayong base. Sana may ipakita kayo. Please do not add fuel to the fire. You will just destroy government. Huwag ninyong sirain ang gobyerno kasi masisira ang tao. Pag nasisira ang gobyerno, lulutang tayo lahat.
Still to come, the president says he will not give an inch of Philippine territory to other countries. The DOH assures that safeguards on prospective COVID-19 vaccines are in place even without Phase 4 trials. More on these when the PNA Newsroom continues.
Sa matinding laban natin sa Coronavirus Disease 2019, sugpuin din natin ang pagkalat ng fake news. Huwag magbahagi ng impormasyon na hindi tiyak ang pinagmulan. I-check mabuti ang source ng balita. Kumuha lamang ng impormasyon mula sa mga official channel ng Department of Health. Huwag magpadala sa maling balita, basta't sama-sama at laging handa. Kaya natin to. Isang paalala mula sa DOH, PCOO, KBP at ng himpilang ito. Alamin ang tamang paraan ng pag-ubo upang mapigilan ang paglaganap ng Coronavirus Disease 2019. Ugaliing magdala ng panyo o tissue. Kung uubo o babahing, takpan ang buong ilong at bibig gamit ang panyo o tissue. Kung walang dalang panyo o tissue, maaaring gamitin ang braso na pantakip. Kung nakararamdam na kailangan umubo o bumahing, agad na dumistansya sa mga tao sa paligid. Huwag dumura kung saan-saan, gumamit ng tissue at itapon sa basurahan. Ugaliin ang paghuhugas ng kamay at paggamit ng alcohol o hand sanitizer upang mamatay ang mikrobyo. Basta't sama-sama at laging handa, kaya natin to. Isang paalala mula sa DOH, PCOO, KBP at ng himpilang ito.
You're still watching the PNA Newsroom. President Duterte is said to be consistent in his policy towards China, but will not give even an inch of national territory to any state. Secretary Delfin Lorenzana earlier said provocations in the hotly disputed areas in the South China Sea are coming from the Chinese who have illegally occupied some features within the Philippine exclusive economic zone. Moreover, the Department of Foreign Affairs filed a diplomatic protest against China over the illegal confiscation of some Filipino fishermen's equipment at the Scarborough Shoal by the Chinese Coast Guard in May. Foreign Affairs Secretary Teodoro Locsin Jr. called on China to adhere to the sea ruling, saying the arbitration award in favor of the Philippines is non-negotiable. Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque acknowledged that the Philippines and China would still clash, but noted that this should not get in the way of their friendly ties.
Consistent naman po ang ating presidente, hindi po magiging dahilan itong unresolved issue sa ating teritoryo bilang hadlang para isulong sa ating diplomatic bilateral relations with China yung mga bagay na po pwede namang isulong gaya po ng kalakal at investments. Patuloy po tayo nagpapalipad ng mga supplies papunta po sa kalayaan at patuloy po tayo nagpapalipad o nagkakaroon ng overflights dyan po sa Baha de Masinloc.
While the country battles coronavirus disease 2019, internal armed conflict continues to beleaguer the country as the threat posed by local communists persists. During a webinar on international humanitarian law, Executive Secretary Salvador Medialdea said specific acts of terrorism have been reported to the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict at a time when the government aggressively responds to contain the spread of an invisible enemy and mitigate its impact on Filipinos and the economy. Medialdea said these acts such as extortions, harassments, ambuscades, and killings by terrorists will not remain unaddressed as government forces stay focused on their mission to protect national security. He said that in keeping with international humanitarian law, the government is reminded that uplifting the dignity of the people in such difficult times remains the government's utmost concern. Presidential Communications Operations Office, or PCOO, assures that the Duterte administration is supportive of the role of activists in society. This amid allegations that state agents are behind the death of two activists who were murdered just days apart. PCOO Secretary Martin Andanar said the government will run after the perpetrators involved in the killings of human rights activists and defenders in the country. He denied that President Duterte directed the Philippine National Police to withhold information from the Commission on Human Rights regarding report on activists' murders. According to Andanar, authorities have been directed to exhaust efforts to bring perpetrators behind bars. The Department of Justice has formed a separate special investigating team on the death of National Democratic Front of the Philippines peace consultant and peasant leader Randall Echanis and Negros-based activist Sara Alvarez. Andanar said the government is determined to complete the investigations and prosecution on the perpetrators and bring justice for the family of their victims. The Department of Health said safeguards will be in place to ensure the safety of COVID-19 vaccines, even in the absence of Phase 4 clinical trials. Health Undersecretary Maria Rosario Vergeres said the DOH is part of the group which has recommended for the exemption for the Phase 4 clinical trial. This is to expedite the process so we can use the vaccines as soon as possible. The fourth phase, or post-marketing surveillance trials, delve on the evaluation of a drug or vaccine's long-term safety and effectiveness. Meanwhile, 172 countries are now signed up with COVAX Global Vaccines Facility. COVAX aimed to deliver 2 billion doses of a safe, viable vaccine by the end of 2021. WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said this would bring the COVID-19 pandemic under control through pooling resources and distributing a potential vaccine to all countries taking part. Up next, Malacanang condemns the twin bombings that killed 6 soldiers and 5 civilians in Jolo, Sulu. And the Pony Boys of Baguio City's Wright Park turned to horse compost making to make a livelihood amid the COVID-19 pandemic. The PNA Newsroom returns after these reminders.
Tandaan ang tamang paraan ng paghuhugas at paglilinis ng kamay upang makaiwas sa iba't ibang karamdaman. Basain ng tubig ang mga kamay at sabunin. Unang sabunin ang mga palad at ang likod ng mga kamay. Kuskusin na maigi ang pagitan ng mga daliri at maging ang mga kuko. Isunod ang pagitan ng mga hinlalaki at kuskusin ng paikot ang mga dulo ng mga daliri sa magkabilang palad. Banlawang mabuti ang mga kamay sa malinis na tubig at patuyuin ang mga kamay gamit ang single-use towel o air dryer. Basta't sama-sama at laging handa, kaya natin to! Isang paalala mula sa DOH, PCOO, KBP at ng himpilang ito. Alamin kung paano ang tamang pagsusuot ng surgical mask. Una, hawakan ang mask sa strap at siguruhing natatakpan nito ang inyong bibig at ilong. Tandaan, ang may kulay na bahagi ng mask ang dapat nasa labas. Ito lamang ang tamang paraan ng pagsuot nito. Ihulma ang nose piece o maliit na metallic strip ayon sa hugis ng inyong ilong. Iwasan ang paghawak sa inyong ilong at bibig. Kung marumi na ang mask, hubarin ito gamit ang strap at itapon ito sa isang basurahan. Siguruhin ang maayos na paghuhugas ng kamay gamit ang sabon at tubig. Ang surgical mask ay dapat gamitin ng mga pasyenteng may sakit sa baga o mga taong mayroong ubo, sipon at lagnat, mga nag-aalaga sa mga may sakit, at mga healthcare at frontline workers. Maaari ring magsuot nito kung kayo ay pupunta sa matataong lugar. Basta't sama-sama at laging handa, kaya natin to! Isang paalala mula sa DOH, PCOO, KBP at ng himpilang ito.
Malacanang on Monday denounced the 2 successive bomb explosions in downtown Jolo, Sulu that killed at least 6 soldiers and 5 civilians and injured 40 others on Monday afternoon. Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque also offered his condolences to the families and loved ones of those who died in the incidents. He assured that authorities are conducting an investigation which includes identifying the individuals or groups behind the dastardly attacks. Roque also urged Jolo residents to stay vigilant and report suspicious persons or activities. In a separate statement, Cabinet Secretary Carlo Nograles said the twin bombing should serve as tragic reminders that despite the prevailing health crisis, the government must remain vigilant in face of continuing threats to national security. Meanwhile, the Armed Forces of the Philippines on Monday advised the public to remain calm, vigilant, and report any suspicious persons or activities. AFP spokesperson Marine Major General Edgar Arevalo said troops on the ground are evacuating and providing treatment for the casualties while securing the area. PNP Chief General Archie Gamboa directed the Provincial Regional Office Bangsamoro Autonomous Region to secure the area and expedite investigation. According to reports, 9 people, including 4 soldiers, were killed in the 2 successive bomb explosions as the troops are continuously pursuing the Abu Sayyaf group bandits. They were also trying to find out whether the attack was connected to the suicide bombers being attacked by 4 Army intelligence operatives who were killed by 9 cops in Jolo last June 29. Malacanang said President Duterte does not need to establish a revolutionary government to make true on his promise to push for a federal system of government. Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque said Duterte has not abandoned his campaign promise, but he never considered establishing a revolutionary government as one of his options. He explained that Duterte is only looking at 3 options to amend the 1987 Constitution, namely Constitutional Convention, Constituent Assembly, or People's Initiative. He dismissed suspicions that Duterte has plans of extending his years in office beyond 2022. Roque, meanwhile, said he does not see a need to criminally charge revolutionary government proponents for inciting sedition as there is no clear and present danger in their actions. He pointed out that Duterte is busy prioritizing the government's COVID-19 response. He, however, said he could not stop them to push for their own advocacies, including the push for a revolutionary government. Armed Forces Southern Luzon Command Chief Major General Antonio Parlade Jr. on Monday rejected calls made by a group seeking to establish a revolutionary government. Parlade reacted to calls made by the so-called Mayor Rodrigo Roa Duterte National Executive Coordinating Committee, which launched a movement calling for a revolutionary government. In a confirmation hearing before the Commission on Appointments, Parlade said there is no need for a revolutionary government as the government has a robust constitution and existing mechanisms. Parlade noted that there may be a need for constitutional reforms, but maintained that these could be done through legislation. Parlade also stressed that if a revolutionary government is established, the AFP will abide by the Constitution. Malacanang on Monday declined to comment on the appointment of actor Robin Padilla as chairperson of the Strategic Communications Committee of the Philippine Army Multi-Sectoral Advisory Board. Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque said the board is in the best position to decide on persons to appoint to the committee. He, however, said media personalities play an important role in influencing society. Padilla assumed the position as Stratcom Committee Chief less than a month after joining the board on July 8. The Stratcom is the PAMSAB's arm responsible for ensuring information dissemination on the Army's operations. In a separate interview, Army spokesperson Colonel Ramon Zagala said former Army Chief Macairog Alberto nominated Padilla to the position. He also noted that the military sees Padilla as a Muslim youth advocate who can dissuade them from joining violent extremist groups. Nearly 14,000 members of a transport group in Bulacan who were affected by the impact of COVID-19 on Monday received food packs from the provincial government and the private sector. Governor Daniel Fernando led the distribution of sacks of rice and frozen chicken to the members of the Bulacan Federation of Jeepney Operators and Drivers Association. The SM Supermalls also provided relief goods to the public transport sector. Fernando said the distribution of food assistance to the jeepney drivers is part of the provincial government's intensified response in the midst of the pandemic. Jeepney, tricycle, and UV Express drivers affected by the pandemic also received Kalinga packs through the SM malls in Marilao, Baliwag, Pulilan, and San Jose del Monte. Apart from the transport sector, marginalized communities were likewise benefited by the relief distribution. With COVID-19 slowing down tourism in Baguio City, the Pony Boys of Wright Park have come up with a new means of livelihood. The Association of Pony Boys, who used to serve as guides to tourists, have resorted to making compost fertilizer using horse manure as a source of income. The 200-member group started making the compost fertilizer after the declaration of the enhanced community quarantine in March. Soon they began to have customers and big buyers who get as much as 100 sacks of compost and fertilizer. The Pony Boys said the horse manure that they used to just give away is now helping them survive amid the pandemic. Earlier, Mayor Benjamin Magalong donated 500 sacks of horse feeds for the association to help take care of the horses while waiting for economic activities in the city to reopen. And here's another look at today's biggest stories. President Duterte assures that every peso spent on the government's COVID-19 response will be accounted for. The president says he will not give even an inch of Philippine territory to other countries. The DOH assures that safeguards on prospective COVID-19 vaccines are in place even without Phase 4 trials. And the Pony Boys of Baguio City's Wright Park turned to horse compost making to make a livelihood amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you for watching another episode of the PNA Newsroom. To check out more news content, check our webpage or head onto the Philippine News Agency's Facebook and Twitter accounts. For more stories about the government and how it serves Filipinos, look for these hashtags at all of our social media platforms and websites. We are shown on the pages of the PCOO and its attached agencies. Also watch us on television on PTV4 and IBC13. And that's your daily dose of the biggest stories that you need to know. From the PNA Newsroom, I am William Theo. Good day and stay safe, everyone.